no small topic, and it's been a meaty one to prepare and think, how do I articulate this succinctly for you today and give us some stuff to talk about. And just out of interest, is there anyone here who wasn't here last night? Oh, there you go. I need to do another plug for the EA then before this morning is over. If I was to ask you to describe the times we're living in, where would you start? Where would you even begin to try and explain that to someone? It's really easy with the pressures that we face on a daily basis, all the responsibilities that we've got and the things we're juggling, to just, our eyes are down a lot of the time. And what I'm hoping that we can do today is just lift our eyes up a little bit, to reflect on some of the stuff that's happening around us. And I think as we become conscious of that, we're a little bit more likely to stop and think, what does countercultural living look like? Rather than just get kind of swept along, which is very easy in the flow of culture. And like Ian said, we're living in really interesting times, and God is doing something unusual, and it seems like doors are opening for the gospel, that unlike certainly I think most of us will have seen in our lifetimes. And I think this need for spiritual discernment has never been greater than it is right now. A people who can reflect on the times that we're in and have a sense from the Lord of what a response looks like in this generation. So there we are. So this is going to be our springboard text this morning from 1 Chronicles 12. You might want to open, if you've got a Bible, you might want to open this chapter up. The sons of Issachar are described in this chapter as being men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. 200 chiefs with all their relatives under their command. And as I say, this morning we're going to be looking at what does it look like to be like the sons of Issachar. This chapter is recording the transition of the kingship from Saul to David, and talking about which tribes and which people came over at what time. So if you do look at that chapter, you'll see that the first chunk of people who came over were the kind of David's mighty men, who, when he was still an outlaw, they saw that he was going to be the king, and they followed him and went to him. But later on, after Saul dies, there's a list of all the tribes, and if you look down that list of tribes, against most of them, there's something about them being fit for battle. They're mighty warriors. But it really stands out that it says the sons of Issachar, there was something about them. They had this strategic insight. It doesn't talk about their battle readiness. It says they were people who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. I think it's interesting to note as well that because of this, it's the only verse in the list of the tribes that says that they had all their relatives under their command. So being people of discernment also made them people of influence. So just want to look at those words. The word for times there, the Hebrew word is et, and it doesn't mean clock time. It means strategic opportunity. It means season. If you know the Greek version of the Old Testament uses the word kairos, and you'll maybe have heard people talk about in the New Testament the difference between kairos and chronos, time. It's a bit like me saying to my boss, I want to do a piece of research next month, and him saying, we're not going to have time to do that, meaning hours, minutes, versus, it's not the right time. It's not the right time. That's the kind of distinction between that. This is not talking about chronology here. They understood the times, the seasons that we were living in. And this was important to Jesus. He challenged the religious leaders of his day. Jesus said to the religious leaders, you know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you can't interpret the signs of the times. I mean, the Messiah was standing right in front of them, the religious people, and they missed what God was doing in the moment. The sons of Issachar also knew what Israel should do. And the word know there is yada. It's very easy to diagnose a problem sometimes. I think the great British superpower is that we complain about stuff, but it takes discernment and wisdom to know what we should actually do about it. And this word for know here is a deep knowing, an understanding, a relational knowing. And it points us towards thinking the sons of Issachar knew because they knew God. Right at the heart of being a person of discernment is knowing the God who has all wisdom. So the question we're going to be asking today is not just about what's happening in the world, but what is God doing and how is he inviting us to respond? And I think Paul, again, captures this really well in Ephesians, this idea of these two things. Ephesians 5, look carefully at how you walk, not as unwise but as wise, making the best use of time, that's kairos time, the season, opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, don't be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. So wisdom here, being a people of wisdom, is connected with discerning the season, the times that we're in, and understanding how God would have us respond. So we're going to do three things. We're going to look at the times we're living in. We're going to look at what opportunities this presents for the gospel and how we're going to respond. The first section that I'm just about to launch into, there's a lot of information, so ready yourselves for that. There'll be more stories and stuff when we get into looking at what God's doing in this season. But I just would invite you to be thinking. We're going to, after this, move into a discussion of like what is this creating for the gospel? What opportunities for the gospel? So be listening with that in mind. Be listening to the Lord, and see what sparks you're thinking about. Well, what does this mean about how God is at work here? So what times are we living in? And I probably should say that this is not the definitive list of everything that's going on in the world, because that would take more than 15 minutes. But the first one I want to talk about is information pandemic. I know it's a bit of a cliche to use the word, but we're living in a time of conflict around the world. Cost of living crisis is being talked about again because of that. The NHS is on its knees. The population is ageing. Young people have got a mental health crisis. All around, that's what we see. That's what we're bombarded with. And the Collins Dictionary word of the year in 2022 was permacrisis, if people heard that. And it's a joining together of kind of permanent, saying we're in a state of permanent crisis. I don't think that that's changed since 2022. But none of those things are particularly new to our generation. We are living in a season of peace and stability, unlike most generations before us have ever known, and actually unlike what most people experience around the world right now. You only need to look at the plague in the 14th century, where 75 to 200 million people died. Or the Second World War, less than 100 years ago, between 70 and 85 million people lost their lives. So, I think what makes our time in history particularly unique and brings its own set of challenges is information. I'm going to be talking quite a lot about that this morning. Unlike those who've gone before us, we are living in a world of information overload. We've got this 24-hour immediate news cycle, so that everything that is happening that is bad in the world, we know about instantly and almost in real time. On top of that, today's news consumption, the way we consume news is really fragmented compared to like a generation ago, where people would sit and watch the nightly news broadcast or read the newspaper, and there was a kind of general agreement on what was happening in the world. Today, people are getting news through personalised news feeds and social media, podcasts, streaming platforms, and being part of online communities. And we'll all have heard the famous algorithms that are shaping our lives. Algorithms tailor all of that news to our own individual views, beliefs, and they create echo chambers where we're mainly exposed to viewpoints that we already agree with. The result of this is that there's no shared understanding of what's actually going on in the world right now, of current events, and it makes public discourse and the kind of chat about it all become increasingly polarised. So while digital media has kind of made the news kind of much more accessible, it's also transformed the way that we interpret and engage with all that information. And we're living also in a time of what's being called the rage economy. I'm sure you've heard that term. At the core of the kind of digital world is this reality that angry people engage more. We're drawn to negative news. I think it's something about being a human being. We've got this instinct to have this survival mechanism, and we want to click on stuff that looks like it's an immediate threat. And it's called rage baiting. And all the people who are putting the stuff online for us know that. Anger triggers this immediate compulsion to act, whether it's clicking on the headline, to comment on something, to share something. And this loop of rage baiting is continually training us to respond emotionally to stuff rather than rationally. And that translates directly into advertising revenue and profits. And at the end of the day, it's all about the money. People are trying to make us angry to make money. But this constant exposure to negative news that we've got in our faces all the time, and this rage and anger that's being stirred up in us by social media, is creating this fight or flight state that we're living in all the time, this kind of hyper-arousal. It's releasing stress hormones like cortisol in our bodies. And over time, that just takes its toll. You know, it affects us mentally, physically, socially and psychologically. And no wonder our younger generations are facing a mental health crisis, because that's the only world that they've ever known. And I mean, I think even if you're sitting here today saying, well, I'm not really online an awful lot, this is the world that's happening around you, this is your family, this is the people that we're seeking to reach for Jesus. The second area is, I mentioned it briefly, this polarisation in society. So there's a group called the World Economic Forum, and they meet at Davos in Switzerland every year. You've probably heard of them. It's all the kind of powerful people in the world, and they have a list of risks. They put together risks that's facing us as a society globally. And they have polarisation as number 3 on that list that's happening around the world. Political disagreements are increasingly being driven by values and identity and culture rather than just policy and different opinions on that. And you'll need to look at Brexit, at immigration, at Scottish independence to see that played out. And social media is a key driver of this. It rewards, as I say, outrage, amplifies extreme voices. It creates this echo chamber, and then we just keep getting exposed to stuff that we already agree with, rather than being given any alternative opinions, rather than being encouraged to think differently or ask good questions. It feels like the age of nuance is dead, and that just tilts us all increasingly into opposite camps. All of that, I think, the polarisation is fueled by inequality in our society and by distrust in institutions, seeing our political leaders all falling from grace in various ways. And as we get more distrustful of our institutions, it creates a distrustful population. I think that we're about to see our 7th Prime Minister in a decade as a result of that. It's not that the Prime Ministers are less good at their job, it's that we are just far more untrusting and far more discontented with what we're seeing before us. And it creates a space for populism, and what that means is it's the kind of us and them. You see it in the North-South divide, it's us, the people, versus the powerful elite. Populism is what has made space for playboy and business tycoon being the president of the United States of America. And it's what's most likely, very likely to allow Nigel Farage to be our next Prime Minister in the UK, because people are, that rage that gets stirred up, that distrust with the kind of so-called kind of elites in society, where that would have been laughable just a few years ago. And as a church, we're not immune to polarisation. We're not quite the level of America, but I've never seen evangelical Christians taking sides more than over the last couple of years in the UK. Our chief exec, Gavin Calver's social media feed is a fascinating watch when you look at the comments. People Bible-believing, Jesus-loving Christians, tearing each other apart over different views on, particularly of late, Tommy Robinson and the Unite the Kingdom marches and whether that's a good or a bad thing. The kind of return to Christian values in the way that they're using the word Christian these days. Some of that tone of that discussion makes me feel like we are some way off from John 17 and Jesus' prayer that we would be one so the world would see him. The next thing is everyone's favourite topic, fake news. Coming back to the World Economic Forum, it's been in their top 3 for the last 3 or 4 years, and it's one of the ones that they are saying over the next kind of few years is going to remain strong. Misinformation, disinformation has got the impact to affect all the other risks on their kind of list. It's got the power to disrupt democracies, to erode social cohesion. It makes economic downturns worse. All of this is fueled by the fact that we're living in a fake news world. And over the past decade, the volume and the reach of misinformation has increased dramatically. It's no longer just the conspiracy theories that are kind of they're out there in the internet. It's all of us are affected by this. Think of it's even just headlines being interpreted, real events being interpreted in a particular way, that Donald Trump's suing the BBC for their selective editing of his kind of rally of his supporters at the time when he didn't get his election win. It's hard to know what's true anymore. And it's closely, again, linked to social media platforms that, again, they reward engagement over accuracy. They're promoting outrage, they're promoting fear and agreement over balanced, accurate, calm reporting. One example of this, do you remember the Southport attack, the knife attack on the young girls at our dance school? The information was spread to tens of thousands of people that it was an asylum seeker who had perpetrated that. And there started to be like riots and civil unrest, and before the police were even able to say it, that wasn't true. So there's a great case of misinformation being spread incredibly quickly on social media, and trouble happening as a result, faster than the police could contain. And all this is being exacerbated, and I have no idea where it's heading by the onslaught of AI in all of its various forms. Just for fun, this is me and Donald Trump last weekend in Anstruther, having a glass of Prosecco. And I use that to make a point. That actually was my mother in that photo before, but I'm no technical expert, but that took me 30 seconds. Do you know what I mean? Like, Photoshop's been around for a while, but that literally took 30 seconds. I mean, it's pretty convincing. This one's a different one. Forgive me to the people from Riverside who I used this slide a couple of weeks ago. This is me in Herrnhut in Germany, although it actually isn't. It's actually a picture that I took in Herrnhut in Germany, and that's a picture of me from the Highlands in Scotland about 10 years before. And I just thought, that would be better, that picture, if I was on it. So again, 30 seconds, put me on that pavement, and there it was. And I just use that to use an example of that's just me having a bit of a play versus what is actually possible, and the need to, almost we can't believe anything we see, and the need for us to be discerning about what information we're being fed and what images and videos that we're being shown. And I think in a Christian context, there's something about what does a calm, patient, truthful response look like to all of this? How do we ask ourselves? They're teaching this in schools now. I saw a thing about Finland. They're teaching school children in Finland how to ask questions about where is this information coming from? What is it trying to provoke within me? And just be very conscious of that as we read it, as we consume it, and about how we respond to it. I think discernment is less about instant response and about how we cultivate habits of humility and a commitment to truth over reaction. As I say, I saw just a very real example for us recently. Somebody commented on a post that we'd shared an event we were doing, and somebody just was very quick to jump in and say, that's a terrible idea that you're doing that, with no curiosity about, well, why? Why are you doing that? Help me understand. Let's be those people rather than the people who are quick to jump in. And let's be prayerfully asking God for insight as we are reading and consuming all of this information, to be asking that he would help us to perceive the truth. Influencer culture. The rise of social media has led to an influencer culture like never before, where traditional media was the kind of gatekeeper to you having a large audience. You had to be on TV or you had to be in the national press. Pretty much anybody now can get a following. You just need to find some people who are interested in what you've got to say. In some ways, the more outrageous, the better. And you can get a following. And people are making tens of thousands of pounds/dollars a month out of this. And again, the algorithms play a great role, an important role in what we're seeing, prioritising content that captures your attention and keeps you hooked. And the advent of influencers, I think, is also linked to this distrust that we've got in our institutions now. People want authenticity rather than kind of the political and corporate messages. They're drawn to personalities that feel relatable and real, and getting glimpses into people's everyday lives gives people a sense of connection and relationship with those who are online. And I know that's when I start to be old, because I'm looking at this and thinking, how can you possibly be just wanting to see somebody make breakfast or take their dog for a walk, because that's what a lot of that content is. But yet that makes me look like a dinosaur, but that is what people are watching. It's revolutionised how things are being sold. A survey by the Direct Marketing Institute in 2024 found that 60% of consumers trust influencer recommendations, and nearly half of all purchasing decisions have been influenced by people online. But as this grows, so does the unintended consequences of it. A study last year by Portsmouth University showed that social media influencers are spreading misinformation, they're endorsing dangerous products, they are setting unrealistic beauty standards, they're fostering a comparison culture, not disclosing sponsorships with products, and they're breaking privacy regulations. But there's advantages to this too. Influencer culture has just made communication very democratic. Anybody can say anything they like. Voices that might otherwise not be heard are finding an audience. And it can foster niche communities where you can find people like you. This is one of my main uses of social media now, just for fun. So I'm in community groups. I'm also in a whole load of groups for tall women. And there's this one called Tallternative, which is about kind of alternative places to find tall clothes. And it's got 30,000 people in it. It's UK based. And honestly, it's a whole group of people who just understand. Or Laura Young, Christian Laura Young, you maybe have heard of her, Less Waste Laura, otherwise known as. She's got 100,000 followers now across social media platforms. And she's using that to talk particularly about environmental issues. Who do you think's got the most followers in the world, other than Jesus? Right now, there are 1 billion people in the world listening to, guess who? Cristiano Ronaldo. It's staggering, isn't it, when you think of the influence that people have got? He's got, that's 10% of the world's population. 1 in 10, when you think of what the world's made up of, are listening to a footballer. Mr. Beast, I have no idea. My 11-year-old nephew, big fan. He has got, 700 million followers. 500,000 of those almost are on YouTube. So that's the world that we're living in. And if we're thinking about having a voice and having influence, we're speaking into that kind of culture. We're getting there. Widespread loneliness and the fragmentation of community. We talk a lot about lonely old people, and a lot of our church stuff is kind of is looking to reach lunch clubs and stuff. But a recent study from the Office of National Statistics in 2025 showed that people in their 20s are the loneliest in the UK. A third of Britons aged 16 to 29 reported feeling lonely often, always, or some of the time. So that's your core Gen Z. And it actually declined by age group, and people in their 70s, it was the lowest. And that's backed up. The World Health Organization did a review of studies of loneliness all across the world, and they found that young adults and adolescents had the highest levels of loneliness. I think at the over 85s it starts to get really high again, but it does shoot up. But analysts say that most of the research shows that it's young adults who are feeling particularly isolated. So what's driving that? There's a scattering effect, isn't there now? People grow up and then they move away, they study away, they work away. They don't have the same community roots as they maybe would have had in previous generations. They don't feel a local sense of belonging. There's remote working more now than ever. People are marrying later or not at all. More single-person households. And, of course, far less face-to-face interaction. Now people are communicating online. I think with older adults are obviously still vulnerable to this. People with illnesses, people who are experiencing bereavement, people who are in lower socioeconomic groups, again, feel reportedly more lonely. And the impact of all this chronic loneliness is strongly associated with poorer mental health, higher rates of depression, anxiety, lower self-esteem. It can lead to harmful coping mechanisms, increased alcohol intake, you withdraw even more, leads to more loneliness. And physically, long-term loneliness is linked to higher risks of cardiovascular disease, weakened immune response and cognitive decline, with some comparing it to things like obesity and smoking for its actual physical health impacts. So in recent years, the NHS has actually started social prescribing, and people who are coming in with certain mental health conditions are being sent off to local charities to go and do gardening or dance groups. And over 1 million people in 2023 were given social prescriptions. another challenge for us as a church. And we're almost there. This last one is almost just a bit of a conclusion of the rest. The failed promises of the age that we are living in. It's a conclusion, as I say, as much as a trend. For many in this generation, the great promises of our age have failed to deliver. We have consumerism has promised satisfaction, but anxiety and loneliness continue to rise. And individualism has promised freedom, but people are more isolated than ever. Every ideology and ism under the sun promised justice or progress, but people are left exhausted and angry and frustrated and divided. And technology has connected the world in ways we would never have imagined, but people are still aching for meaning and identity and belonging. And even all these cultural narratives about looking inside and finding the answers within yourself, people are still asking the deep human questions about why are we here and what gives life meaning, and really importantly these days, who can I trust? People are realising that material success, activism, entertainment, and all the forms of self-expression are not answering the deepest longings of our soul. So that's a little bit of a download to get you thinking. We're going to spend the next little bit of time getting into groups and just sharing about, okay, so what? So what opportunities are we seeing this create for the gospel? Where are we seeing God at work? So find some friends and start chatting. There we are. We're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about, so what opportunities is this creating for the gospel? This is a little bit of like what I've seen as I've gone around, met leaders over the last year and a half or so, and also from other EA colleagues. But, we all know it. There's this increased spiritual curiosity, I think is the best way to describe it. And this, I think it's just coming out of cultural exhaustion and disillusionment with modern life. People are looking for meaning, they're looking for hope and transcendence, something bigger, something greater than themselves in all sorts of places, including within the church. And particularly young adults, as I say, because I think they're the most affected by digital life. But people are open to all kinds of spirituality right now, not just the Christian faith. This is just a few of the things, especially younger women. This article from the BBC in the middle, Witch Talk, is on TikTok, and it's received over 3 billion views of people casting spells and dabbling in witchcraft and the like. Just in terms of the sense of scale, people are into crystals and into manifesting, putting stuff out in the world and believing it's going to come back, and all sorts of kind of interesting spirituality that's happening. But there's also a trend towards kind of digital detox and retreats and slow living and pilgrimage and everything, both within and outside the church. And just as a little, on the back of that, a little plug for a resource that the Evangelical Alliance has recently just launched called Ethos. This is a kind of online tool aimed at the spiritually curious Gen Z type young adults. They can go online, it takes them through some questions about themselves and leads them into spiritual practices that they become recommended, whether it's prayer, solitude, silence, fasting, various different spiritual practices that are as a gateway into faith. So if you know people in that world or you're in that world, that'll be something to check out. But it's a growing trend, and people are asking, they're looking for answers to spiritual questions that previously just were kind of marginalised, but all these spiritual questions about what's the meaning of life have come to the fore again, and people are reconsidering the Christian faith, not just as a kind of moral system, but as a source of hope and purpose and meaning, trying to make sense of the world that's around us. And interestingly, I think that's linked to an increase in people having spiritual experiences, stuff that used to be just the stories we would hear about from Iran and parts of the church, places where people, the gospel witness maybe wasn't very strong or there wasn't a lot of freedom. And they did a survey last year or the year before called Finding Jesus. It was looking at adults coming to faith, and 28% of them said that what caused them to start thinking about faith was a spiritual experience that they had. And then they started to explore. They either went to church or they started reading the Bible off the back of something that had happened. And just these kind of God appearing in a dream type stories I'm hearing more of them now. I don't know about you. And two that I heard from different Glasgow leaders recently, both young guys. One of them had a dream of his gran telling him to go to church, so he showed up. And another one was a young guy who just had a dream of a monk telling him to go to church. It's so random. But the fact that kind of these spiritual encounters, that God is coming and meeting people in that way. And, you know, we've probably all heard of the Quiet Revival survey that everyone was talking about and now has been withdrawn by the Bible Society. And the research is going to be redone, but it was only one of many surveys that gave evidence to the fact that there's definitely something afoot. I've got a few examples. So this was a survey in 2026 of 10,000, or 2025, 10,000 UK adults by one poll showed that Gen Z are half as likely to be atheists as their parents. So only 13% of Gen Z young adults said that they were atheists compared to their parents, so it was a quarter. Student group Fusion started to see this openness among students, and they did a survey in 2025, and just one example from that, 3/4 of students who were asked said that if one of their friends asked them to go to church, that they would say yes. And the Evangelical Alliance did research as well called Changing Church, and we did it in 2021, we did it again in 2025, and there was twice as many people reported just in that 4-year period of people coming to faith, a huge increase in people showing up at church and twice as many people actually coming and making decisions to follow Jesus. And there's similar reports have come out of other places in the world, in Finland, in America, you know, seeing more millennials going to church, more men than women for the first time. And it's not just Protestant denominations. France last year reported this record number of baptisms at Easter, 45% up from the year before. And I just, as a really random example, I have a Christian Catholic friend who is involved in leadership, and she said that, I can't remember the word for it, but the number of adults who are kind of reaffirming their Catholic vows has just gone off the charts. And she didn't know anything about the noise around all the Quiet Revival stuff. She's just like, oh, we just don't understand at all. And I was like, oh, everybody's talking about this. This is a thing. So, you know, it's happening across the board. People are hungry and looking for God. And just in terms of the kind of travelling around and some of the stories that I've been hearing, the kind of anecdotally, this also seems true. Leaders saying, I've baptised more people in the last year than the last 10 years put together. People walking in out of church just curious or feeling this sense of wanting to get their life right with God. I spoke to one Gen Z couple who just got married, and they said 3 of their lifelong friends had become Christians at their wedding, and another 2 just after. And the guy actually said to me, I'm running out of non-Christian friends. I know it's amazing, but a problem to have. A colleague of mine had some friends, some students over for lunch after church, and she said these 3 19-year-old girls had started doing an Alpha course at Strathclyde University. 22 of their friends came along, most of them became Christians, and they were now like, oh, what are we going to do with all these people? They were going to start a Bible study. One of them had only become a Christian a couple of years before, because she just decided that she would read the Bible on Christmas Day, and by the end of January she'd given her life to the Lord. And it's not just young people. Dundee, just to balance that out, in Dundee a few months ago, a leader told me that they have a lunch club and people in their 70s and 80s were being baptised, and said, we're doing nothing different. There's just a different fruit coming from the same activity. And, you know, we've had this graduate intern over the last year, this girl Lily, who I've never, you know, and she's would be in that early 20s. She went on holiday to Morocco and came back, and she was doing Bible studies with the people that she met in the hotel, her and her pals. That's just, as a lifestyle, you know, and I just think, wow, God is at work. God is at work amongst that generation. There's also, alongside this, there's this hunger for truth and for stability. All the things we've been talking about in the kind of rise in this toxic online culture, and the way that we're being manipulated by algorithms and people not entirely knowing what's true any longer and distrusting institutions, it's all leading people to be like, well, what actually is true? What can I stand upon? And there's this desire for objective truth. Can we actually believe in anything? So you'll have heard, I'm sure as well, because it was picked up by the media, there's been a huge surge in Bible sales. Publisher SPCK reported 87% increase in a 5-year period, and it's massively been driven by young adults, bucking the trend of decline in the publishing industry. And I think in this like fake news post-truth world, Younger generations are being drawn to good news. They're hungry for good news. They want to know things that are true and beautiful and good. Robin McClellan, who's the chief executive of Scripture Union, I heard him talking recently. He's like, young people cannot get enough of Bibles. They just can't get enough of them. And I've heard so many story after story of the Bible being a really central part to people's journey of exploration and faith. And I think it's interesting that while younger women on the whole are being drawn into all the kind of witch talk and it's a bit of a generalisation, but it's proving to be true. It's younger men are being drawn to people like Lynne Paterson. If you know him, he's a kind of Canadian psychologist. He's got a huge following. He's not a believer, but he's teaching. He's doing sell-out tours on like Genesis and calling people back to biblical morality. And young men are flocking in their droves. And many stories I've heard of people coming along to church because of someone like him, being influenced by someone like him who isn't even a believer. People like Justin Brierley and all his stuff in apologetics is finding its moment right now. And I think it really just strikes me that there's very different pathways that people are following that are going to be coming into our churches and are coming into our churches just now. And another wee resource plug, 2 podcasts that the EA's got if you're interested in exploring all of this a bit more. From a Christian point of view, there's Cross Section, which is all about helping us navigate the endless news cycle, social media, what's happening around us, and the kind of culture, and it's helping us connect that with the good news of Jesus and equipping us to be people of good news who are living in that world. And the other one is Being Human, the free book that's in the Evangelical Alliance membership packs. For those who would like to join this weekend, it's the Being Human book. It's a whole initiative about helping us tell the story of what it means to be human from God's point of view. And to people who don't know Jesus, and to be able to speak into all the things that are happening around us through a biblical lens. So there's a podcast of that as well. There's a small group resource. I can commend that to you if you're interested. The next thing I think in terms of opportunities for the gospel and another pathway into the church is people are hungry for authentic community right now. We've talked about how this fragmentation of society is causing people there's loneliness is widespread, and that there's this hunger for actual genuine community where people are looking for belonging, they're looking for shared identity, they're just looking to be cared for and looking for stability and embodied presence, real people with real flesh, rather than just digital connection. And there's lots of surveys both in America and here in the UK that show that that's a big reason, a big driver why people are showing up to church. They're just looking for friendship, looking for community. There's a particular group of people that is their number one thing. They're mentioning things that I want a supportive community. It's the whole thing that we've probably known for a long time, is that people want to belong before they believe. Or belief certainly isn't necessarily the entry point for everybody into the church. So churches that are prioritising community life and community outreach and engagement are going to flourish in this season, particularly for that group of spiritual seekers. Just a couple of stories from colleagues. One of them was, I have a colleague called Ben who is also as a church leader, and he said that he'd a guy who was a Muslim, became a Christian, started coming to his church. Very costly decision. You lose a lot, I'm sure you know, of your kind of social fabric and infrastructure. And he said, I feel like I've given up community for services. I thought, oh, ouch. I mean, that's an indictment, isn't it, in the church? And he was doing his best. And Rachel, who's our head of mission, told me another story from a church leader. He'd had 2 young adults coming along. They'd been there for about 6 months, and then they vanished. And when the church leader followed up with them, what they said was, they didn't find community, was the bottom line. It wasn't what they thought, which was, was it actually too hard to be a Christian? The discipleship decisions that you have to make. But what they were saying was, well, the friends that I've lost through following Jesus, I've not managed to find within the church. And again, I was like, oh, Lord, help us do better. And another little, sorry, this is starting to sound like a sales pitch, but another little resource that you might find helpful in this is my colleague Phil Knox has done a lot of stuff on friendship. And you'll find that on our website too. He's written a book about, and it's all about how we just, it sounds so obvious, but how we make friends like Jesus made friends in a way that's welcoming and open to other people. And there's a small group resource for that as well. But church, as authentic community just feels really critical too for this polarised society that we are in right now. We're called to be a counter-cultural community of all ages, all social backgrounds, all generations, ethnicities. And as polarisation grows, isn't there just an opportunity for the church to really shine brightly as the beautiful thing that God intended his community, his body to be? You know, the gospel message is about peace and reconciliation and forgiveness and grace and love. And that's going to entirely depend on our ability as the people of God to demonstrate the way of Jesus in a culture of outrage. You know, it's Sermon on the Mount stuff. It's what does it look like to be humble? What does it look like to think of others more than ourselves? What does it look like to turn the other cheek and love our enemies? Is that our approach to engaging with the world? Is that our approach to engaging online, especially where there's such a lack of it? And I just think the opportunity right now for us to show a cross-shaped response to a digital generation just feels huge. I think that we've got some way to go in the body of Christ to be that one body, that countercultural people in this polarised society, but I really do think that we are way, way, way ahead of the world. And this is our moment, actually, if you know, for people to really stand out amongst everything else that's going on in the world. And the last area I want to say, clicked twice. The last area is just, we've talked about some of the challenges and the negative stuff about digital, the digital world we live in, but it's also a huge mission opportunity. You know, we're all being formed by something. We're all being formed by the people we engage with, by the communications we receive, but increasingly formation is happening online. And these influencers that we talked about are increasingly shaping people's beliefs and attitudes and behaviours. And we, as I say, we looked at some of the challenges, but it's a huge opportunity. People are encountering spirituality first online. They're through influencers. And they're encountering Christianity, a lot of them, for the first time through these influencers too, through people sharing testimonies, you know, through people like Justin Bieber. You know, he's got like more than 500,000 followers and he's sharing his faith. Now, we might not agree with all of his theology or think he's got everything right, but he's having more influence than we are in terms of, you know, the people that are listening to him. And I mean, we think about even digitally the discipleship resources that are available. You can do the Bible in the Year with Nicky Gumbel. You can do it with the Catholic version of Father Mike Schmitz, if anybody follows that. There's Lectio 365. There's all these digital resources that people can access. And I think there's something about the internet is no longer just a shop front for the church. I think we're past that. It's now a place where people are finding information. They're even finding community. They're following people who are following Jesus and being shaped by that. And some Christians have got massive followings. Forrest Frank, who's a singer-songwriter in America, has got like 10 million people following him. There's a guy who's got influence for Jesus. And just a few stories. You know, I've heard leaders saying that people are coming into church because of something that they saw online. I've heard that story a lot, and not even just because they were prompted by something. That some of them are coming ready to make decisions because they've already listened to sermons and they've already read the Bible and they've already like thought this through, because they've found all of that on the internet. There's a leader in Glasgow called Brian who was saying that like he's had to learn TikTok. He's like it wouldn't have been it because he wanted to start inviting young people to church, and then people are showing up and saying, "Oh, I saw your invite on TikTok, and here I am." You know, it's a whole new way of doing church. Another story about a guy who was interested in Christianity and asked ChatGPT what he should do, and ChatGPT told him what church to go to, what to wear, what to expect, how long it was going to take to get there. I mean, you know, it's unbelievable, isn't it? It led him straight to the door, and there he showed up. And there's churches that are embracing this. Since COVID, some churches have kept online congregations. It's maybe not ideal, but it's meeting a need that some people have. There's a lady, Ruth, who set up this thing in Glasgow called, well, it's obviously bigger than Glasgow, it's online, called House of Word and Spirit, and it's basically she's forming a church community for people online. And, bit by bit, obviously trying to nudge them towards their Zoom Bible studies, and there's kind of, but there's daily devotionals going out. So people are thinking creatively about how can I reach the world where it is, because everybody is there. And I think as Christians, what does this mean for us? Well, we're not trying to create followings on the whole. Some people are, and that's what they're called to. But, we kind of almost are called to hiddenness and integrity, and costly love kind of runs against that kind of influencer culture in some way. But I think for us, it's like, well, what does it look like to be a witness for Jesus in that space? Because I'm sure most of us have probably got friends online in some form, if we're on there, who don't know the Lord. And I think there is a challenge for us to think, well, actually, how am I testifying? How am I sharing Jesus in that space? Because people genuinely are looking and are hungry. So we're just about to have a cup of tea and coffee, but it's just as a pause to recognise that, however we have got here, we're in this space where there's an open environment, and people are coming into our churches and are hungry for God and are hungry for something deeper for lots of different reasons and lots of different motivations. It doesn't necessarily mean revival, but there's certainly opportunities for the gospel right now, unlike we have seen, as I say, within our generation, and it includes here in Scotland. So I'm just going to pray for us, and we're going to come back and after a cup of tea and coffee, spend a little bit of time back in our groups thinking about what does this mean for us? How's God asking us to respond to this? And, collectively as a church, but also as individuals. So let's just pray for a moment. Lord, all these thoughts, all this information, but we do want to hear your voice. I thank you for the way that you're at work to draw people to yourself in these days and moments and hours. And even as we go and have a coffee now and a short break, Lord, would you continue to be stirring us and prompting us with your voice about where do we fit within this, Lord, this world, however much we're engaged with all of the information that's happening, Lord, around us. How can we be witnesses for you in this space? Amen. We are coming into land. There's only a few more minutes from me, and then we're going to be spending some time sharing and praying for each other and praying about how we respond. There's a few last people grabbing tea. But I want to make sure we finish on time, so I'm going to make a start. And I mean, so I love this passage in terms of how God would have us respond. I do wonder perhaps something like this and what we can learn from this in this snapshot of the early church. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favour of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those that were being saved. And I just love that passage so much. And I'm just a few things in terms of response from me just to prompt us. It's not the definitive list. And none of it's rocket science. If you were writing the list, it would be the same list. But the first thing is about being devoted to prayer and to the Word of God. And there's two aspects of this. I think in terms of prayer, the need for us to invest our time and energy in our own spiritual rhythms and practices has never been higher. In a shaking world, we need to be the ones who are rooted in Christ. And in an angry, exhausted, disillusioned world, we've got to be abiding in the vine so we can be drawing grace from Jesus, so we're able to live that Sermon on the Mount lifestyle to the people around us. In a fake news world, we've got to be people who know the truth and be stuck into God, get stuck into God's word, and also be asking for the wisdom and discernment of the Holy Spirit to help us. And in a world that's manipulated by algorithms, we need to be spiritually awake. This is not a time for us to be sleepwalking. The call to wake up for the church to wake up to this and to what is going on around us is huge right now. But I think the second area of this is about intercession. We want Alpha to be bigger than witch talk. Do you know what I mean? This is the spiritually curious. Let's pray. We need to be praying like never before that curiosity turns into conviction, that people who are open to spiritual things would find Jesus, that people who are coming into our churches would stay. To be praying that the presence of God is so tangible that people will come in and will go, I have found the Lord here. To pray for those dreams, more of those dreams to be happening so that people will show up having seen their gran in a dream telling them to go to church. I mean, I love that. Let's not just pray for it for other parts of the world. So, the prayer meeting, which has traditionally been the least attended part of the church, friends, it's time to change that. In fact, the younger generation are changing it already, because the amount of people who are doing prayer and worship nights spraying up all over the place, doing that on a Friday night rather than going and doing all the things young people do on Friday nights, is a beautiful thing to see. And if your church doesn't have a prayer meeting, then why not start one? Why not get with some friends? And I don't know about you, but for me, I find it much easier to pray for these bigger things with other people than I do on my own. The second thing, again, not rocket science, is about sharing our faith confidently and courageously. And it's time to just go again. And I say that to people who are, on the whole, my generation and older, because I see the people that are around me in their 20s and they've just got no issues. They've got a boldness that I think I probably had when I was in my 20s, but a few decades of disinterest, which most of us have had. It kind of wears you down and shuts you up a little bit, but this is the day for our lips to be loosened and for our testimonies to be shared again, and all those, and to be, if it's about getting back into practicing that, to be sharing it with your friends, to be inviting people to church again, because there's a whole load of people who really do want to come and they're just waiting for us to ask them. I don't know if I mentioned it, but there's the Talking Jesus. DE did, and I feel like I've talked a lot about research. We do a lot of research, but there was a big piece called Talking Jesus a few years ago, and this was 2022. We're just about to do it again, but a third of people who said that if their family or friends shared their testimony with them, wanted to know more about Jesus. That's 1 in 3. How many people are we not telling who are waiting to be heard, to hear the good news? And let's get comfortable with that again. The next thing is about investing time and energy in discipleship. As we see more people coming to faith through all these different pathways, we've got to have good answers about what's next. And I know church leaders in the room, this will be very much the top of your agenda right now. Again, the Finding Jesus research that I mentioned earlier about adults who are coming to faith, the number one need that they had as new believers was help with spiritual practices and help with finding community. And it's so important that we all in this room realise it's not just the job of the leader. I spoke to a church leader a year ago or so who, it was a quite small church, and 3 new people had come in, were just on a journey of exploring faith. And he was exhausted because they all had quite significant pastoral needs. They came out of difficult situations, and he was carrying it all himself. And he was utterly exhausted. And if the 1s and 2s that are showing up at our churches become 10s and 20s, are we ready for that? Have we got the processes in place, but also have we got the heart in place? And I think if you're a leader here, how are you building the capacity of the people in your church to be ready to disciple and mentor others? And for all of us, young adults especially, I was chatting to a man in the break, young adults are looking for spiritual mums and dads. Yes, there's all this stuff online and there's all these influences, but at the end of the day, just people to read the Bible with, people to love and to care for you. I signed up for a mentoring thing in my church recently, a couple of years ago, and I've absolutely loved it. And I've been a Christian for 40 years, and I've got a master's in theology. I'm needing somebody still to know me and care about me. And I've loved having just a wise friend to be able to do intentional life with in that way. So I think that all of us need that. How are we ready to be that for other people, especially a younger generation who are crying out for it? I think there's something, I'll just throw this into the mix as well, because I've heard it mentioned quite a lot, but it's really interesting from a discipleship point of view to be thinking about deliverance ministry. And it's something that I know that in lots of our churches, it's not a thing. It's a thing in the Bible, but it's not necessarily a thing we've seen today. But increasingly, I've heard church leaders saying, oh my goodness, people are coming out of all sorts of interesting spiritual practices and are needing set free, and we don't have the skills or the experience to know what to do. And I just think it's something to be thinking about and to be learning from those who have got a little bit more experience and are ahead on that journey. But people are, again, needing freedom who've been involved in a lot of that witchcraft. And the last thing is about building authentic community. And I love that from that verse I read in Acts 2. I know it's a particular time and culture, and our individual lives and our busy lives are hard compared to maybe what life looked like then, or in terms of time and what we can give. But there's something so beautiful and so attractive about that picture of the early church brimming over with life, because they'd encountered Jesus and they were encountering Jesus together. They were meeting frequently. They were praising and praying together, not just because they were in a small group structure, but there was just a natural overflow of life. And I just want to just raise that and think, well, what does it look like to be building that type of community? Not because it's part of a program, but because we just have a heart to invest in community and to build a community that people are going to come who are looking for belonging and be a part of. So that's kind of it from me in terms of probably heard enough of things to say. We're going to go back into our groups, and maybe don't make the groups too big, but I would say find a few people. That's just a few thoughts from me. Let's share what's stirring us. What very practically might you do to respond? I know there's people from very different generations here who will have different experiences of some of the stuff I've talked about. What might you do? What might God be saying to you? So let's get together in our groups, share a little bit of that, and then we're going to spend some time praying for one another. And let's pray for each other, and then it'll also be, if you run out of things to pray for, let's start praying for more people to come to know Jesus. Remind people that we would love you to consider joining the Evangelical Alliance. We were formed in 1846. We're about to be 180 this year, and we were formed with two main aims, and they're still our main aims today, and they're about uniting the church to take the gospel to every part of the United Kingdom. I've mentioned quite a few resources and ways that we do that. But also what I've said less about today is we unite the church to provide a clear and effective voice into the corridors of power, particularly for us here in Scotland, into Holyrood. I have a full-time member of my team whose job is to do that, to respond to various consultations. We're part of the faith and belief group. We speak up on issues of freedom of religion, dignity, start and end of life, issues of justice. But we also tell good news stories about how the church is serving communities. We want our politicians to know what we're for, not just what we're against. So we're here representing our members into the Parliament and telling good news stories and stories of hope. And when it comes to having a voice in Parliament, numbers really do matter, and particularly the number of individual members. And I said last night, we've got this goal of getting to 50,000, which is right now the same size as the SNP membership. So it really does, we were at 14, we've got 30,000 individual members right now, 3,000 churches, 500 Christian organisations across the UK. And we are seeking to grow that, because when you join, you are not just giving money, you're giving your voice and you're adding your weight. So we're really keen to represent the evangelical Christians of the UK, not as a fringe group, but as a body to be reckoned with and a voice to be heard. So we really would encourage you to consider joining. The cost is £3 a month. It's kept very low because, as I say, you're giving your voice, not just that donation. And we do have membership packs. And actually they have that Being Human book, I think a lot of them in it, which I mentioned earlier on, which I know people, and a whole load of other resources, bits and pieces of some of the things that I mentioned, the Ethos resource and Being Human. There's also a thing in there by the Lawyers Christian Fellowship, which talks about our gospel freedoms in the UK, which are amongst the highest in the world. So you can make use of that. And I said it last night, I'm going to say it again, the trolley coin keyring, which is always there as an incentive. Everybody needs one of these, the Evangelical Alliance trolley coin. which has got, just use it as a reminder to pray for the gospel witness in the UK. So we'd love you to come and join. My colleague Susanna is maybe out. Oh, she's at the back waving over there. Is going to be out at our little table for a while. So please do join. If you join today or tonight, then we'll be able to give you one of those packs away with you. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you coming this morning. Over to the worship team for a final song.